Muy buenos días a todos y a todas. Muchas gracias por sumarse a este importante seminario que estamos impulsando desde CAEM, junto con la Embajada Británica, y contando con la presencia del profesor Richard Herrington en esta ocasión, quien ha desarrollado una importante investigación que es de mucha utilidad y que trae preciosa información para nuestro sector. Así que le vamos a dar la bienvenida al profesor Richard Herrington. Él es investigador del Museo de Historia Natural de Londres, efectuó investigaciones sobre la necesidad del uso de los recursos naturales de la Tierra para un futuro sostenible para nuestro planeta y su gente, especialmente pensando en el rol de la minería en esta transición. Esta temática tiene especial interés en nuestro país, ya que Argentina podrá tener un rol destacado contando con la mayoría de los recursos minerales que el mundo necesita y demanda. Particularmente destacan el litio o el cobre, que son esenciales para la electromovilidad y la generación de energías renovables. Aprovecho para comentar que este tipo de temáticas van a ser centrales también en la próxima edición de Arminera. Este año Arminera cumple 25 años y estaremos desarrollando esta importante actividad en la rural del 22 al 24 de mayo, así que esperamos que nos puedan acompañar. Agradecimiento especial para la Embajada Británica. Tenemos aquí la presencia de la embajadora Kirsty Hayes. ¿Lo dije bien? Embajadora Británica en Argentina, y también Alfredo Fierro, que es del área comercial, agregado comercial de la embajada, y al equipo de colaboradores que lo hacen posible. Así que agradecemos a todos la presencia aquí. También, inicialmente, este evento iba a desarrollarse en la Sociedad Científica Argentina. Realmente, bueno, cuestiones técnicas nos trajeron nuevamente a las oficinas de CAEM, pero también un agradecimiento a ellos por acompañarnos en esta iniciativa y ser presentes. Y, bueno, damos inicio a esta actividad. Le voy a hacer la palabra a la señora embajadora.
Bueno. Perfecto, mil gracias. Buenos días a todos y gracias a los amigos de CAEM por recibirnos en su casa. Desde que llegué a Argentina hace 1 año y medio, rápidamente tomé conciencia de la importancia que Argentina tiene y va a tener en la minería mundial. Y yo sé que en la actualidad Argentina está enfrentando varios desafíos muy fuertes en términos económicos, pero yo soy muy optimista sobre el futuro del país, y una de las razones es exactamente esta riqueza natural que Argentina tiene. Argentina tiene reservas importantes de minerales de uso en la industria de la construcción, de metales preciosos y, por supuesto, del cobre y el litio, tan importantes para la transición energética. Y yo tuve el placer de visitar el salar de litio de Rincón en la linda provincia de Salta el año pasado, y observar personalmente las posibilidades en esta industria. Pero muchas veces se cuestiona a la minería por su impacto en el medio ambiente. Lo que no siempre se aprecia es que sin minería es imposible realizar la revolución verde que el planeta necesita para sobrevivir. Y este es exactamente el tema del cual nos va a hablar Richard hoy. Y quiero agradecerle a Richard por su disponibilidad a hablar con nosotros. Argentina tiene la oportunidad no solo de contribuir al mundo con estos minerales necesarios, sino también de asegurarse que esto se haga con los estándares más altos de seguridad, de protección ambiental y de compromiso con las comunidades. Desde la embajada, para nuestros distintos equipos, esto es una prioridad, y por esto Por eso estamos a su disposición para encontrar proveedores y socios de mi país que puedan trabajar con sus empresas para darle fuerza a esta revolución verde. Quisiera destacar también que no todas las inversiones ni los inversionistas son iguales. Y tenemos en el Reino Unido muchas empresas muy comprometidas, no solo en la área de tecnología verde, la extracción con menos impacto en el medio ambiente, sino también en términos sociales, porque el impacto social en las comunidades locales también es un tema clave para esta industria. Hoy es para nosotros un enorme gusto el poder sumarnos a CAEM en darle la bienvenida a Richard y sin más demora nos sumamos a escuchar atentamente sus palabras. Muchas gracias.
Sorry, so I apologize that my Spanish is extremely poor and I will be talking in English, but hopefully with the translation things will be clear. So thank you very much for the chance to talk to you today. And I want to present the work that we've been doing, but focused around this concept that we need to have a future that is green, but really stressing the fact that mining forms a very strong part of this this new economy, and therefore the use of minerals is extremely important. Just very quickly, need to go back. Thank you. I'm from the Natural History Museum in London, one of the world's great museums. In fact, for the last 2 years, we've been the most popular visitor attraction in the UK. We have more than 5 million visitors every year. And we're really glad this week we've opened a new exhibition of an Argentinian titanosaur from Chubut region, something we've worked on for a couple of years to have that come to London. And we're extremely pleased to have that on display in our galleries, and it's proving extremely popular, and already it's selling out tickets, and it'll be a chance for people to see the amazing wealth of the natural world in Argentina. So we hope people will share that. So we have systematic collections of our work, more than 130 years of work around the world. We have 300 research scientists at the museum. And my particular area is working on the mineral diversity of the natural world, but its actual use for humankind. If we look at human development, it has been linked to mineral usage, and this simple graph here is showing the fact that, you know, since 1700, when we were using very few raw materials or diversity of raw materials, to where we are now in the 21st century, where we're using more than 36 elements regularly, each of us every day. And so it's the breadth of usage has changed, but also the depth and the amount that we need. This is a simple diagram. It's actually published in the United States, but it just has the facts about the individual usage of particular minerals, and not many people know that they're going to need more than a ton of aluminium in their life. It's quite sobering when we put this down to a personal level. And whilst maybe the world needs not everybody in the world will need this amount of raw materials. It's quite, as we transition into more developed society, our use of metals will expand. So far, as geologists, and I speak as a geologist, we have been good to find. We've been successful in finding what we need. This graph shows the amount of copper the world uses And it starts on the left there in 1900, where most of the world's copper was coming from the United States, as you can see at the bottom. But as we've gone through some industrial transitions, we can see a big one there is after the Second World War, where we have a linear growth up until around about 2000. And then we've had an exponential growth since 2000, really, as we've entered the technological era and with the industrialization, particularly of places like China and Brazil and the Indian subcontinent. And you can see that the development of mining has been huge, particularly you can see in Chile for copper, to the point where Chile now provides about 30% of the world's copper. But other Latin American countries, particularly Peru and Argentina, are really important in that development. Now, the thing is, will we be able to continue this? You can see these graphs are climbing and they show no sign of stopping. But the thing is that we have been able to keep up with that. Another challenge that we've had is obviously the one that is hanging over the world because of climate change. So this is a new challenge that we're facing, and it's this the idea that we should be mitigating the climate change that is due to our use of carbon. And I'm just putting up here the UK government strategies in this area. The idea that in net zero, to achieve net zero, we need to build our infrastructure back in a much greener way. And parts of that is decarbonising the power system in the UK by 2035. So, you know, in that decarbonising, I just want to put a graph up to show the areas that we kind of need to change and what we've been changing in the UK particularly. If we look here, the amount of carbon dioxide that the world produces can be divided into sectors here. So electricity and heat, so power generation, that's producing about 42% of our carbon dioxide emissions. Transportation is also a big producer of carbon dioxide, and the industry is another part of a big chunk of the sector there. You can see residential and other areas not so much, but we really need to tackle the way we generate electricity and the way we run our transportation, which is all based around fossil fuels currently. So if we talk about what are the interventions there of power generation and transportation, what this graph shows, you can see I've highlighted in the red boxes. This is the mineral needs of the current technology. So conventional cars using fossil fuels and power stations based around natural gas and coal. So you can see building new power stations for coal and gas doesn't take much metal. But actually, when you start to build things like offshore wind, you can see more than 4 times the amount of metal needed to develop that infrastructure for every megawatt of energy. And it's similar for cars. So again, 4 times the amount of these minor technology metals, if you like, are needed in an electric car versus those in a conventional car. So going green is definitely a mineral hungry business. If we, so I'm finding trouble moving the slides on. So it's not only for these technical metals, but also bulk commodities. So here, what I'm showing is the statistics for use of concrete, aluminium, steel, copper, glass. So these are major commodities. If we look at the conventional power generation, coal and gas, you can see we don't use very much, relatively speaking, per megawatt. But if we look at the renewables, we're using much more, particularly concrete. Now, this is really significant because the generation of cement produces a lot of carbon dioxide. So building the infrastructures for the renewables has a cost, an initial cost of these raw materials. But it's a long list of critical elements. You might hear that there are sort of 20 critical elements needed, but actually it's a range of materials and metals, and I've put them in this graph here. So for the magnets for our electric vehicles, we need rare earths, but for batteries, it's lithium and coal. Elements from the periodic table, but copper, zinc, silver, chromium, and steel goes across all of these. So even the traditional metals are actually critical for delivering this net zero transition. So the increasing demands, this is an IEA study, which suggests on the left-hand side, you can see the percentage increases for the particular commodities. You can see more than 500% increase in some of these, including things like lithium, cobalt, graphite. Even though aluminium there, it's a 9% increase. Actually, volumetrically, that's very large. And on the right-hand side is the volumetric increase in each of those commodities. So you can see for aluminium, it's really significant. For copper, it's really significant. And actually, the statistic for copper is quite chilling, because between now and 2050, we need to be mining as much copper as we have mined to date in history. So it's quite a challenge. We hear a lot about recycling. Can we just recycle? Well, the answer is unfortunately not. There's not enough stock. This graph shows for each of the commodities, for different commodities, the amount of recycling, which is shown in orange. So that's the amount that each of those metals is, or minerals, is recycled at the end of their life. So when, say that a car comes to the end of its life, how much of that metal goes back into the economy? And you can see we're doing quite well. Quite a few things we get up to sort of 90% recycling. But the blue bar is what's the percentage of the current demand satisfied by that recycling? And you can see it's much lower. So even though we're recycling a lot, it's not enough to supply the way we're growing our commodities. So you can see the best there is probably things like lead, because lead, it's a market that is quite circular. But for other, even major metals, we're only getting 50% of our materials from the recycling chain. So, and particularly for things like lithium and cobalt and so on, these new enablers, they will only become significant for recycling in about 2040, because obviously they're going into cars and technologies. We're not going to recycle those till they come to the end of their life. So they're not available for recycling. And so it's only by 2040 will we get up to sort of 30–35% of those materials that we need from the recycling chain. Another source is waste materials, and we've looked into that. So we've looked at waste. This is a European study that is actually looked at a range of commodities and how much we can get from the waste stocks. So we know how much is there, but actually only for a few commodities is that significant. For example, cobalt on there, 10,000 tons that's available in European waste, that's only between 5 and 10% of what the world needs each year. So even if we were to use all of the waste, it would still fall significantly short of what we actually need. And that's because we know world economic growth is increasing our demands. And if people continue to use the per capita rate that they do now, we're going to be growing that need. Now, of course, that brings in the question: should we be thinking about the way we use materials? Should we be less wasteful? Should we be changing our mobile phones less frequently? These are societal decisions that I won't comment on today, but I'm just simply presenting the facts. If we continue the way we're working now, what are the material needs? And we hope economic growth for some of these countries continues, because surely some of these countries need to be able to grow to support their growing populations. So more mining is needed, but where will that come from? We know that the predictions point to growth of metal usage, but actually, this is a graph published by some colleagues in 2017 that's suggesting by 2040 we're going to start having a shortfall if we're not careful. This is for copper. So we've got growth in production right up to 2040. We've got those resources in the bag, if you like, and ready to mine. But if we don't find more, you can see there's a drop off, and then we're going to have if we think our growth curve is going to continue, we're going to have a shortfall after 2040. And this is just at the point where we're really getting into the transition to try and reach net zero before 2050. So this is just a graph, and my slides will be available to people to follow up. But it's basically showing, again, recycling is important, but actually the shortfall is still there. Another thing I want to raise is geographic monopolies to metal supply. And at the moment, on the top there, I show for fossil fuels the distribution of who produces what. And you can see for natural gas why the recent problem with Russia has been so detrimental to world supply, because you're taking out about 30% of the world's natural gas because we no longer want to import from Russia. Now, if we have a look at some of the metals below, so the minerals are down there, you can see actually the monopolies for some of those are even worse than the situation we have for oil and gas. And some of those countries are very stable, and I think we would have no issues with, but some of those countries, it does seem rather unhealthy that we have rather monopolistic supplies. And we've heard lots of scares about rare earths, but even copper. When Codelco went on strike a few years ago, the copper price really reacted, and also for supplies of things like rhenium, which come from those mines. So we do need to be aware that actually, like our choice in supermarkets, we really should be trying to get diversity in mineral supply if we really want to get around these issues of supply chain, which the COVID crisis has exacerbated to us. Another complicated graph, I won't talk about this, but there have been many analyses about which of the minerals have supply risks. This is some work that Thomas Gradell did in 2015. Basically, the further up the graph, either to the right or upwards, those dots go, the more at risk they are. And we can weigh those on supply risk, environmental difficulties. So, perhaps there's pressures on not the places where mining might be stopped. And then also just other sort of statistics. So useful analyses, but it suggests that a number of these metals have some problems with supply. I'll skip that one. We've already talked about that. So there is this recognition to secure mineral supply, and I've just put up some here. This is where the UK government have been engaging. There's the critical mineral strategy was released last year. I sit on the panel, the advisory panel for the UK's critical minerals group, and the critical minerals centre that's been set up in the British Geological Survey. And the UK has been busy signing agreements to ensure that those supply chains are in place. And it's quite clear that I think all governments are looking to do this because it is important, and ensuring that we can deliver the challenges. Our government has been committed to net zero by 2050, but now this recognition that securing mineral supply is absolutely critical to that. If we don't have the minerals, we will not be able to deliver our net zero pledge. Okay, so we're hearing a bit, I hope it's not all doom and gloom about supply issues. We can still find new deposits. So this is a new lithium deposit that's found in Serbia by Rio Tinto. And it was 100 million tons of a completely new mineral. Normally when we discover new minerals, the small isolated grains down a microscope slide, but here was 100 million tons of a completely new mineral found in Europe. And so this gives me great encouragement as a geologist to continue looking, because the more we look, the more we can find. So it's important to keep looking. We also recognize that there are long lead times for many of the mines. So this is some data here from some published data from other colleagues that shows that actually for the average time to get from discovery to getting a mine into becoming production, you can see here for copper, it's more than 16 years. That's quite worrying. That means that a mine found tomorrow wouldn't come into production until the late 2030s. For lithium, it seems to be quicker. And, so different commodities have different complexities of putting together mining projects. But we need to be mindful that finding new mines does, even if you find them today, the benefits won't be seen until quite a long way down the track. But what's happening is it's stimulating work to go deeper at existing mines. This is just an example from Ireland, Republic of Ireland, where Europe's largest lead zinc deposit, bringing in the technologies from the hydrocarbon industry, they were able to discover deep new resources. And so we do have the ability to extend beyond, in this case, double the depth at which we can discover new resources. And that's really important. There's other agendas here for new frontiers. You're probably aware that there are mineral resources on the deep ocean floor, and there's a lot of discussion here as should we allow mining on the ocean floor. Currently, there are no active mining operations on the deep ocean floor. It's regulated by the International Seabed Authority, who have given permits for exploration. And now, currently, these are being looked at. And assessments made of the environmental impacts. But you can see this quite significant. If we were to able to use the nodules on the ocean floor, there's more than 450 years of cobalt waiting. But it's a complex debate about where our new minerals should come from, and there's a lot of discussion out there as to whether we should go to the ocean floor, whether we should mine on the terrestrial surface. And this is a societal decision, and we need people to understand the need for minerals and engage with the fact that it's got to come from somewhere. And so let's make sure we have a scientific assessment of going to the best places for those minerals. And so one of the things I've been working on is how can we stimulate looking for the minerals in our own backyards, particularly in old mining districts. I mean, they're already degraded, they've impacted, and bringing some of these closer to home, closer to the markets. If people understand they get a benefit from mining, they understand where their products are coming from. I think people understand where their food for their livelihood comes from. We need to get people to understand where these minerals and metals come from, and perhaps they would be happier to see mining coming closer to home, where it brings jobs and generates local activity. And just I'll put up some relative values of the European ore districts. This is obviously for a European audience, but somewhere like the Lubin district in Poland has a value of 270 billion US in 1980. It's worth a heck of a lot more now. And it's a significant copper bearing region in Europe, and it's comparable to other internationally important mining areas. And just a case study of Southwest England. Historically, this was a place where tin and copper was mined. And for those of you who've been fans of the Poldark series, I'm not sure if that came to Argentina, but it has a degree of romance as to how the mineral wealth was used to generate the economy. But it's actually still a potential area of looking for lithium and geothermal systems. And actually now, old mining district is being revitalized in Cornwall to look for lithium. And so the top left there is an old kaolin mine, and now the drilling is in the bed of that pit for the lithium resources there. So this is a bit of a win-win, because it's an old mine, a degraded mine site. Actually, we could put in there a modern mine, which the end game could be highly beneficial, both economically but also environmentally. And indeed, mining is looked on positively in some areas. One of the companies that was exploring in Cornwall did crowdsourcing, and they were able to raise the amount of money that they were able to raise on the open market in 15 minutes. It was oversubscribed by local people, and local people indeed becomes true stakeholders because they now hold shares in the company. And on the right there, Kiruna up in Sweden, the people, when the resources in the mine were looking to decline if they didn't go underneath the mines, the town site, the local people actually voted to move the mine away to allow the mining to continue, because it was so intrinsic on the future development of the people that live there. But obviously it's less welcome elsewhere. I talked about the Rio Tinto discovery in Serbia, Jadar. Public opinion has stopped that mining currently, and the mining licenses were revoked by the government. That's under scrutiny at the moment. And places like Portugal, local people have come out against lithium mining, and in France, a lot of vocal anti-mining support protests too. So it's very patchy where support and dissent lie, and it's quite clear that the mining industry is not getting a common message across to people. And that may be partly due to the legacy of what mining has created in the past. Just coming on to this, the final part of what I'm talking about, the ESG considerations must be paramount for projects. And particularly, these are the three, if you like, three triangles, three pillars of ESG: environmental, social, and governance. Environmental, we'll talk a little bit about that, but social, so important. And so many mines have failed in the past because the stakeholders were not involved right from the beginning of projects in a good way. But obviously that is different today, and we need to make sure that those three pillars are written into every project. So we need better types of mines. There are some good examples of mines that have opened, created wealth, and closed again. Some images from the Flambeau mine in USA, which was a Rio Tinto mine, which opened next to a salmon river. The mining went on, it produced over $6 billion of asset, and the reconstruction of the site has been left. It's very positive. It's got a wetland, it's got new habitat for the environmental habitat, and it's got an industrial site. And so what I'm going to talk about here is that what we need to be able to develop is what I'm calling a cradle to cradle approach to mining, not a cradle to grave. So what we see is that we have a circular economy for mining. So mining is a temporary intervention on a site, and so we need to be planning the mine closure from the exploration stage so that the legacy will be net positive for the planet, for the people, as well as generating wealth. And there are good examples of how that has been done. And we've got clear messaging from COP26 and 27 that secure this agenda. We need obviously to accelerate the transition to clean energy, but we need to ensure sustainable land use moving forward. So we need mining, but we need to make sure that the legacy for mining is positive. And obviously that needs innovative science, and this is something that I will just spend a couple of minutes talking about. So if we have a look at, these are the kind of considerations now we should be bringing into our consideration when we think of exploration. So this is a map of the estimated biodiversity intactness. So what do I mean by that? It's how intact is the biodiversity in a particular region. So the blue areas are basically where the the biodiversity is intact. It's good. It's more than 90%. And the red areas are where it's less than 50%. And you can see so many of the areas are where there's been a lot of human activity. I mean, I speak from the UK, our biodiversity intactness index is about 30%. We're basically a country of farmland. Human intervention has changed what the natural world looked like. Now we can decide that's really bad, or we can make an assessment as to how relevant that is. But actually, when we look at mining, it might give us a steer there on where we could think that mining would not be detrimental to biodiversity, because if you go and work in impacted areas already, then actually you could put interventions in there that would improve biodiversity. Obviously, places like the Amazonian rainforest is a tricky. But geology, unfortunately, means we have to go where the deposits are. So in some of those areas, we would still need to be seeking minerals. But it's an important metric, I think, that the mining industry could pay attention to. So I just wanted to put one slide in, because I've been working here in Argentina. I've had 2 weeks, been really exciting, looking at the copper potential in the Neuquén Basin. And this is a USGS report that talks about copper, undiscovered copper around the world. And clearly Argentina has a great future as potentially as a copper producer. Obviously it's something that needs to be unlocked, and you know, we can say geologically it's got good potential, but there are obviously other hurdles to go forward for that. But obviously I'm also involved in lithium projects, and aware that Argentina has really good lithium potential too. So just there's a couple of extra slides here. Actually, the mining process itself has to change. We know that. So the approach, as I talked about, this cradle to cradle approach, but we need to decarbonize mining. We can see that these graphs here, that our change in energy consumption has been rising in mining. We need to decarbonize that. It is going ahead. A lot of mining companies, the big copper mines, are reducing their carbon footprints, but that's also really an important aspect. Can I move to the next one? Yeah, thank you. So this is perhaps where the UK has a role to play, and we're really happily engaging with colleagues in Argentina over this. UK innovation is looking at new ways of how we can use different types of mineral processing. So these are just two. Using deep eutectic solvents is one new technology that's being tested. My own laboratory, we were working on bioprocessing. How can we use a natural solution? So use microbiology from that's already the microbes that are already in the environment. How can we use those for processing? And we've been applying these to a number of projects, including copper projects. And so just highlighting here, 3 large projects that are funded by our UK research councils that my group are involved in. One of them, FAMOS on the left there, was looking focused part of it on the Andes, is looking for how do we look for copper in porphyry copper systems. And the project in the middle there, which is funding the work that I've been doing with the University of Rio Negro, is looking at copper basin exploration. So we've been looking at the Neuquén Basin as a potential source of copper. And on the right there, we have a project looking at lithium in geological systems. So we have been doing some work in Chile, but we're hoping to engage with people in companies in Argentina, interested parties, to expand our work here. So this is part of the UK government's funding to try and ensure and secure these critical mineral supply for the future. And so I want to just finally wrap up about I think there needs to be this fundamental change in the way we look at mining, from exploration through to project to operation to closure. Industry has tended in the past to be compartmentalized and looking at these functions as a linear flow to a closure. And actually, what I would argue is that closure plans should be thinking more in that circularity. And we recently, this paper I co-authored with my colleague Mark Tibbett is to look at how we can circularize mining, so that mining projects should follow the principle of cradle to cradle. Mining is a temporary intervention. It may be a temporary intervention that's there for 40 or 50 years, but nevertheless, at the end of the day, the site has to go back to a third party. So the mine should be designed with a built-in regeneration. So it should be designated from the start to create a net positive outcome economically, but also for people on the planet. And this can be done successfully. We've got plenty of projects where that has happened. I was reminded this morning of a project in Argentina, and I think it was a Longroad project where that successfully happened in Argentina. And these are some of the exemplars that we could use to show people how mining could actually be part of this, this sort of have a circularity rather than a linear cradle to grave. And so actually means that mines need to be progressively rehabilitated from the start. And this is just another colleague who's been integrating the sort of engineered post-mining landscape right from the beginning. And we've again been working with DEFRA money in the Philippines, looking at this is a mine site in northern Luzon in the Philippines that was closed in 1982 without a post-closure plan. And we've actually worked there to work with the local community on legacy issues. And in the first year, we've made enormous progress of engaging with that local people, assessing the problem on site, both mineralogical and biological, and working with them to design a post-mining landscape for them that is positive. So the artisanal miners are still working there, but also bringing in subsistence farmers to make sure that they're not getting contaminated crops and so on. Yeah, so this was funded through DEFRA. And lastly, as geologists, it's important that information about the materials is the key. We need to make sure we understand about the deposit, not only the metals that are of interest, but also any potential waste that has any kind of problems. So better characterization of those materials is needed in order to develop better handling of the stocks and the flows. And this is something that UK is leading on, this type of work. And in our lab in London, we've developed these work streams that gives us total information about ore bodies. We're automating this work so it can be routinely put into exploration, so that not only do you understand about the positive components in any mining system, but you also can highlight those elements that might give you a problem in the waste stream, but also perhaps repurpose and not think of any of this as waste, but also as a stock to be used in the future with metals that we don't need now, but we could perhaps use in the future. And then also repurpose the waste materials to reconstruct the former mine site. And so my last slide here is just a very busy slide with some takeaway messages. The bottom line is there's a clear need to mine a range of new materials to deliver this net zero pledges that our governments have all signed to, but the sourcing must be done in a way that's net positive for people and planet, and we think we can do that. Definitely optimize recycling and use of waste is important, but mining is both inevitable and essential, and it's for society to choose where that will be done. So we have to be better. If we follow the cradle to cradle principles, I feel we can build a mining industry that is acceptable to people and acceptable economically. But we do need to consider that the regeneration of old districts that are already impacted may have actually a beneficial, it could be beneficial to work in already impacted areas. But definitely mining should be driving other social and economic benefits, localization of industry, cutting supply chains. I think a great example for Argentina is your discovery of hydrocarbons and actually moving away from actually having to import, which it moves that supply issue away. We could do the same with minerals. Local supply of minerals could be really positive. And then we can actually develop some of these projects into positive biodiversity impacts. There's a wonderful project in southwest England, in Cornwall in Britain, that was an old clay mine. It's now a biodiversity study centre. It's called the Eden Project. It's developed local jobs. It's now the most visited tourist site in southwest England, and it's a former mine site. So it just goes to show that mining can supply the metals and minerals we need, but also leave a positive legacy both for people and for the biodiversity. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm very happy to entertain any questions. So thank you.
Vamos a tomar preguntas tanto del piso como del público conectado online. Si alguien tiene alguna consulta para Richard. Sí, por favor.
Presento, soy Alejandro Condecerra del Servicio Geológico.
¿Te paso por la traducción?
Okay. Buenos días, soy Alejandro Condecerra del Servicio Geológico del área de
minero argentino, y es sobre avances que ha habido, sobre todo en la región de Cornwall, sobre proyectos geotérmicos, sobre el componente geotérmico de proyectos, y que hace mucho que no se sabe, no se tiene noticias sobre cómo han evolucionado esos proyectos y si hay algo para compartir.
Thank you, Alessandro. Very good question. Yes, there's an ongoing drilling program for geothermal energy in Cornwall, and actually currently what is quite interesting is they're trying to link the use of the geothermal energy and extraction of lithium from brines. And so one of the concepts there is to work on using that energy to be able to concentrate, using that geothermal energy to generate electricity to concentrate those brines. So it's a complicated economic situation at the moment, which is why there haven't been any announcements. But there's very good potential for the brines to produce lithium, and they can use the geothermal energy to actually mitigate the carbon footprint of that extraction. So one of the issues is that, and having that geothermal energy close by will potentially allow them to do that.
Muchas gracias. Tenemos una pregunta online, es de Agustín López Muñoz y está ya en inglés, así que la voy a leer en inglés directamente. O bueno, la voy a leer en castellano y luego le traducen a Richard. Dice, buenos días, muchas gracias en nombre del Panorama Minero CAEM y al profesor Herrington por la presentación. Ofreció un detalle sintético y atractivo sobre ciertas tendencias ligadas a cómo asegurar la sustentabilidad en la producción de los minerales del futuro. Una consulta en castellano o inglés para si fuera necesario. ¿Cómo cree que impactarían las tensiones en la política internacional de cara a la concreción de estos objetivos de sustentabilidad? ¿Observa dificultades futuras a la hora de alcanzar consensos globales respecto a cómo producir estos minerales?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that question. Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing is that we need to have some joined up thinking here, which is why the UK government have sought to team up with Canada in the first instance to secure supplies. I think at the moment, these efforts are rather, should I say, binary between individual countries, and certainly there needs to be a wider view on that. And I think that has to be driven really by consumers and consumer choice, because for some of these metals, it's a rather complicated supply chains. They're coming from different countries. So if you're building a battery factory that's using cobalt and lithium, it's not possible to have an agreement on those metals together. Rather, there has to be sort of an agreement on lithium and then cobalt supplies. So I think we're probably in the diplomacy period where there are some bilateral agreements coming through, but then I think there needs to be some coherence of an international agreement. And obviously with the war in Russia, that has driven if you like, Russia and China closer together economically, and that could be worrying for supply of metals and minerals, because we have such a Russia control quite a bit of precious metals like platinum group metals. Nickel was an important metal coming out of Russia. So if you like, there's a bit of a new world order developing, and there needs to be some coherence to, if you like, tackle that problem, because there could be supply issues, particularly nickel, as we know. Coppers can be impacted as well, and some of the platinum group metals, in addition to the sort of monopolistic status of some of those metals vis-a-vis China. So I think the short answer is we got some bilateral agreements being sought, but there perhaps needs to be a bigger, almost like a world look at metal supply. And I don't want to set up another UN body, but some group that would be able to look at that in a bigger picture, and particularly enable some of the less privileged countries who don't have the power to make bilateral agreements that the UK and Canada and Australia and so on can make. But and these countries that are less powerful are the ones that have got the biggest challenges to rise to become net zero.
Thank you, gracias, Richard. ¿Alguna otra pregunta aquí del piso? Sí, por favor, te paso el micrófono por el tema de traducción.
Muchas gracias.
Público que está en Zoom, la primera pregunta hacía referencia a sobre si estos escenarios consideran el tema del recambio tecnológico y el hecho de que estos recambios tecnológicos puedan hacer que algunas de estas tecnologías que hoy estamos mirando pasan a ser obsoletas. Y el segundo, en el mapa de biodiversidad que estábamos viendo del mundo, había zonas en rojo, y pregunta si eso implica que por ahí partían desde un punto muy bajo de actividad humana y por ende eso refleja como que la actividad es mayor de la que debiera ser. ¿Te hice justicia ahí o no?
En realidad, me genera la duda porque la meseta patagónica aparece en rojo y denso.
Sí.
Sin embargo, no es una zona apartada, más allá del sobrepastoreo.
La duda es porque la meseta patagónica sale en rojo y no es una zona que más allá del sobrepastoreo sea muy afectada.
Entiendo que eso puede reflejar un bajo índice inicial, medicina biológica, en contraste, por ejemplo, con la Amazonía, Ecuador, partes muy ricas.
Pero eso puede estar reflejando un bajo índice inicial de actividad en contraste en la Amazonia y otras partes del mundo.
Yeah, thank you very much for both questions. Maybe I'll answer the second one first. Yes, this biodiversity intactness index is actually, we were discussing this yesterday at the university. This may well represent the appearance of invasive species. So in an area of low the impact of invasive species could be very significant. And so those invasive species that came with like grazing, so there could be rabbits and, you know, big organisms that would not be native to Argentina may well have come there. And it's not, as you say, it's not an anthropogenic, well, it is anthropogenic in the fact that humans brought those animals into that environment, but it's not a direct human impact. It could be this invasive species. So actually it's homework for me to go back and talk to the biologists about that. I agree, it's not a, if you like, it's not an industrial impact. It's probably the impact on something that had a low biodiversity to start with, as you suggest. And the first one is, yes, technological innovation. It's quite true. But we know industry is quite conservative in implementing new technologies. So we see that with vehicles. There has been a consensus to focus on lithium-ion batteries at least for the next 20 years. So I guess I'm taking things to 2040, by which time, indeed, there will be new technologies. Probably some of those will be obsolete and we'll laugh about, like we did with video cassettes and CDs and so on. But we're going to need those for 20 years, I believe, because of the commitment to the industrial in the factories and so on. So it doesn't really factor in that innovation. And so that's one of the parameters that after 2040, things become very difficult to predict, I think, because of that. Thank you.
¿Alguna consulta más del piso o online? Hago una yo, si les te invito a pensar alguna otra. Richard, creo que mencionaste mucho la importancia de trabajar de una manera distinta a la que venimos ahora, tanto dentro de las fases del proyecto, que no sean fases independientes, como con muchas disciplinas, mirar desde la biología, mirar el cradle to cradle, el cuna a cuna, no pensar como un proyecto que nace y muere, y además pensar en un uso, un lease, un alquiler casi del terreno para distintas actividades. Eso implica que tenemos que hablar entre nosotros mucho más que lo que hacemos hasta ahora, porque no tenemos que hablar solo entre mineros o solo entre gente del agri o gente de lo que sea, sino mucho más en conjunto. ¿Cuál crees que sea el mayor impedimento hoy a que hablemos entre nosotros, cosa que por ahí no somos demasiado buenas en ninguna parte del mundo? ¿Y qué podríamos hacer desde cada uno de nuestro lugar para facilitar esto, ¿no? Si se te ocurre alguna idea al respecto. Gracias.
Yeah, thank you very much, Fred. That's a very good question. It's something, actually, we can take the example in Southwest England. And I think what's missing is some, if you like, regional plans. And we're working to try and do this in Cornwall, where we bring together, in this case, in Cornwall, it's the people, it's the various conflicting land users. So agriculturalists, bringing in the tourist business, and really get all of the stakeholders to design a sort of a regional plan so that we could come up with regions where, let's say, the priority would be to preserve agriculture, could be viticulture in Argentina, and then areas where actually, you know, mining could be the strongest use of that land. But also remembering, as I said, mining is a temporary intervention, and the two can go together. We have plenty of evidence that mining can go on, for example, underneath places that can be agricultural. So I think these are the things that need to be done, and we're trying to bring together government and all agencies in Cornwall. One of the first things that was done was to develop something they call the Deep Digital Cornwall. So it's understanding the subsurface of Cornwall and what might be there as resource. So, for example, geothermal, the metal resources, the water sources. And then if we understand then the soil, so we can understand where is the best agricultural areas and so on. So that's another layer. And then the biodiversity is another layer. And then we have the people's activities, you know, because they need places to live. Indeed, some areas we want tourism, ecotourism to thrive. So to me, this is where governments can help to bring all those people together in the same room so that there's a shared plan, regional or national plan for countries. And I showed that that study of the USGS on, they did the geological layer really of the world for mineral resources. And I think that's quite a good place to start. And then you can build the other layers. So I'm sure the body that are involved in agriculture in Argentina have these kind of plans in their minds, but putting those together and as groups, you know, the miners, the agriculturalists, the tourism people, and the local stakeholders, indigenous peoples, should all be part of that planning process. So that's my feeling.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias, Richard. Veo que tenemos una pregunta online. Guillermo Pensado pregunta, habló de los minerales críticos necesarios para la transición energética, pero no sobre minerales energéticos como el uranio, siendo que la Argentina, además de ser un país con alto desarrollo en la energía nuclear con usos pacíficos y alto potencial geológico para proveer uranio, ¿cuál considera usted el rol de la energía nuclear como fuente de energía limpia para la transición energética?
Yes, thank you for that question. And yes, I didn't talk about uranium. I put some data up there about nuclear power, and it's true. It's clean energy, and clearly with all the renewables we have, and I speak from the United Kingdom and Northern Europe, there are days when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. Sadly, the sun doesn't shine for many days in our country. I've come from a part of the world where we have sun for 300 days, so solar energy is pretty important. But you know, in the UK, we are developing 10 to 15% of our energy from nuclear, and that's put into the future planning. France is very strongly behind nuclear energy, so I feel nuclear energy is part of the plan. And for Argentina, you have uranium potential, and I actually, with my colleague here, we had a look at a potential uranium resource in Argentina. And you know, this, if it's indigenous uranium, it would be naturally a useful thing to use that as part of a plan here. And I know that nuclear power is actually highlighted there. So definitely for certain parts of the world, nuclear should be an option, and probably for Argentina, it's that's worth considering.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Creo que si no hay ninguna consulta, vamos a liberar un poco a Richard. Igual nos quedamos unos minutos, así que podemos charlar uno a uno. No sé, Ale, ¿quieres tomar vos la palabra?
No, simplemente agradecerles a todas las personas que se han conectado y las que aquí están presentes. También gracias a las chicas que están haciendo el servicio de traducción simultánea, que es algo nuevo para nosotros también. Así que espero que haya salido todo muy bien, que se haya receptado correctamente. Bien, gracias de nuevo, gracias al profesor Herrington y esperamos volver a tenerlo pronto por aquí.
Sí,